Hi, welcome to the podcast by Dr. Sushma Singh. Let us start conversation on Unit 23, Education, Social Commitment versus Commodification. And we are continuing Commodification of Education, and subtopic is Social Implications of Commodification. The Birla Ambani report, though, has been widely successful in capturing the imagination of the knowledge society, in articulating the role of education therein, and in establishing the prevalence of educational divide in India. Its suggested strategy predominantly paved the way for the commodification of education. Its recommendation for encouragement of private sector in education, marketing India as destination of higher quality education, reducing funding for universities, private finance in higher education, establishing private universities, promoting foreign direct investment in India education, banning of political activities in the educational campus, etc., not only encourages from fulfilling its social commitment for the educational well-being of the community. Can a developing country like India afford the state withdrawal from the higher education? This report leaves primary education with the state. However, it does not spell out the obligation of the state to provide free quality primary education to all children. The private players are already there in the primary sector to breed inequality in education at an early stage. Will the privatization of education, or in that sense commodification of education, be a panacea for all element backwardness, inequality, inaccessibility, and stagnation in education? Now let us move to the next point, argument in favor of the commodification of education. Commercialization of education has been a contentious issue not only in India but all over the world. Many are of the view that the true competition in the education sector would improve the quality, that social accountability of education institution would be fixed by the conscious uses of these educational facilities, that the access of the marginalized group to education be increased by attracting them to the quality of education and by making education there need based, and that private schools are more accountable than government run schools. It has also been pointed out that in spite of the constitutional mandate, the state has failed in last 60 years in eradicating illiteracy and in ensuring the access of the marginalized groups in quality education. It has been suggested that the initiative of the state should continue in providing financial assistance, infrastructure, etc., for educational development, and the private sector should be encouraged to generate a creative and competitive environment to impart education. We must have observed that in recent decades all over the India the attraction towards private school has increased. A careful scrutiny of facts would reveal that this has been mostly because of the callous attitude of the bureaucracy towards government schools, unsupportive and inadequate management in these schools, declining student teacher ratio, lack of motivated teachers, lack of proper infrastructure, lack of accountability. Proliferation of private schools with better management, better teacher student ratio, good infrastructure and teachers, and better accountability. Such a scenario has helped only to breed inequality in quality of education and thereafter unequal access to education. While the private English medium schools have emerged to cater to the need of the elite segment of the society, the vast sections of the students who are mostly from either the poor or the average economic background join the government run vernacular medium schools. It is important to mention that equal access to education is widely determined not by the progressive policy formulation of the state alone, but by its democratic ideals and strong political will and commitment to ensure greater equality in education, and its willingness to share power with all sections of the society. It argued that commodification of education will help to ensure equality against the backdrop of the state's failure in providing quality education for all. Now let us move to the next point, arguments against commodification. A group of scholars are of the opinion that the commercialization of education would lead to privatization, and that as there would not be adequate control, the quality will suffer, and in the process of the commodification only of commercialization, only market oriented academic programs or courses would be given preference while other streams would suffer, that the commitment to enhance the marginalized grouped access to education would suffer, and that the profit motive would get preference over social commitment. As we have understood, education has several important roles to play, especially for social development, collective empowerment, and in advancing social and economic well-being of society, accumulating and sharing knowledge and cultural capital. It is also a means for individual development and expression. As education plays a critical social role, it cannot be reduced to a mere tradable commodity. It is important that economic forces, unleashed by the forces of globalization, endeavor to treat education as a marketable commodity, ignoring its social and national role. The National Union of Students in Europe 2001 points out that it is imperative for the state to ensure free education for all levels. However, in violation of the Universal Declaration of the Human Rights and the UN Conventions on Social, Cultural and Economic Rights, which has called for open access to higher education, many states in Europe introduced tuition fees to augment finances in higher education in 1950s. This has resulted to an exclusion of students, especially from disadvantaged background, from the corridors of university education, and where the elite students have got comfortable access. The structural adjustment program of IMF and World Bank have led to extensive privatization of higher education in the post 1970s and afterward. The profit motive of the private providers has ignored the vital social, cultural and economic role of education and furthered the exclusion of learners from the disadvantaged groups from higher education. The liberalization of trade in education services under the gates of the WTO imposed several binding obligations for specific sectors on the member states of the UNO. The most important obligation is that of the most favored nations principle, which means service suppliers from different countries have to be treated equally. Again, there are rules for unlimited market access and so-called national treatment, which means all providers of the education have to be treated equally with the two national one. The phenomena of transnational education in the form of one online education, internet based universities, branch campuses, or offshore education institutions, etc., have got prominence under the Gates regime. The expansion of transnational education undermining the significance for the social and national role of education have not only furthered commodification of education but have also ignored the fact that the education is a basic human right and has to be made accessible to as many as possible. Such conceptualization jeopardizes the basis at democratic, liberal, moral, and social significance of education in all parts of the world. To them, the process of commodification of education would lead to the expansion of an elitistic, exclusive, profit oriented education system. In this context, Stephen says that in the process of the commodification of academic labor, the student explicitly becomes the consumer. Degree becomes a commodity which can be exchanged for a job rather than preparing the student for life. Again, curriculum is recognized under the process of commodification as a sequence of knowledge globules, which can be referred as credits with a cut and paste repacking mechanism. In this process, the pedagogic relationship and the values are marginalized and student as consumer becomes a passive learner. To quote him, privatization is not simply a technical change in the management of the delivery of educational services. It involves changes in the meaning and experience of education. What it means to be a teacher and a learner. It changes who we are and our relation to what we do, entering into all aspects of our everyday practices and thinking, into the ways that we think about ourselves and our relations to others, even our most intimate social relations. It is changing the framework of possibility within which we act. This is not just a process of reform, it is a process of social transformation. Without some recognition of and attention within public debate to the insidious work that is being done. In these respects, by privatization and commodification, we may find ourselves living and working in a world made up entirely of the contingencies within which the possibility of authenticity and meaning of teaching, learning, and research are gradually but inexorably erased. In the Indian context, the issue of commodification of education has several social, economic, and political ramifications. Traditionally, investment in education was considered more of a social obligation which the state had to fulfill. However, since economic reforms were introduced in India in early 1990s, resource allocation for higher education has consistently followed a downward trend, with the government's ability to finance higher education reaching a saturation level. It was argued that higher education might be considered as non-merit good as the benefits occur more to individual than to the society in general. As an implication of such formulations, the government would stop providing subsidies to non-merit goods, withdraw itself gradually from the pre-given social commitment of open access to higher education, smoothen the ways for privatization and commercialization of education. As a further ramification to such processes of commodification and privatization of the education, more and more attention could be paid towards the market-driven courses, which the general courses like general science, social science, humanities, art, and literature will be areas of least priority. It would become no longer appropriate to read Shakespeare while the courses like communicative English, professional writing, or business English would become the order of the day. The economic non-viability of certain courses cannot become a justification for their withdrawal. Let us conclude the unit. The right to education is a fundamental human right. The state, international bodies, and the civil society have committed themselves to ensure this fundamental right. This unit has dealt in detail with the commitment made in the Constitution of India for the educational well-being of all sections of the population: women, dual caste, dual tribe, religious, and the linguistic minorities. However, in spite of such commitments, the curse of illiteracy has been looming large on the horizon of Indian society. Several committees and commissions have recommended several remedial actions to ensure the education for all and to enhance access to the quality of education by all sections of the population. The World Development Summit, the Dakar Conference, the UNO have categorically expressed, and all the member states of the UNO have accepted the commitment for the eradication of illiteracy and promotion of professional education among all. All the member states of the UNO have also committed towards the philosophy of commodification of education and have liberalized their market to introduce trade in education. The contradictory processes of commodification on the one hand and of the social commitment on the other have severe implications for the member of the society. In this unit, we have discussed all these implications in detail. Here we wind up this conversation and we have reached to the end of the unit. Thank you so much for choosing this podcast.